In the special housing unit of Coldwater Correctional Facility, a black inmate was about to challenge the invisible line between order and cruelty. What started as a shattered photo frame spiraled when Sergeant Ray Kincaid staged a violent assault and planted a weapon, just to remind the others who ruled the SHU. Malik Ramsey wasn't your typical inmate. A former high school literature teacher wrongfully convicted, he'd endured 6 relentless months in solitary, known across Coldwater as Teach, a man who kept his mind sharp and his dignity intact even when the walls closed in. When Kincaid threw Ramsey into disciplinary segregation under false charges, he had no idea he was messing with a man whose intellect had already survived every psychological weapon the system could throw. Ramsey didn't retaliate with rage. He responded with silence, strategy, and the quiet leadership that would ignite a reckoning from within. What began as an abuse of power would become a dismantling of it. The Coldwater staff and inmate population would never forget the day Sergeant Ray Kincaid found himself on the other side of the cell door, pleading for silence in a prison that had learned to speak. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The special housing unit at Coldwater Correctional Facility had a rhythm all its own, a hellish metronome of fluorescent lights flickering at irregular intervals, punctuated by the hollow metallic slam of cell doors and the occasional distant scream. This was Sergeant Ray Kincaid's domain, a concrete labyrinth where he was judge, jury, and tormentor. Kincaid moved down the corridor with practiced efficiency, boots clicking against the polished concrete floor, keys jangling at his hip like battle medals. 6'3" and raw-boned, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd absorbed his father's military bearing through osmosis. Cell inspection, 2187. On your feet. His voice betrayed no emotion. Inside cell 2187, Malik Ramsey carefully placed a bookmark in his worn copy of Foucault's Discipline and Punish before standing at the regulation position, back against the wall, hands visible at waist level. His cell was immaculate, books neatly stacked on the small metal desk bolted to the wall. Kincaid's eyes narrowed when he saw the book Ramsey had been reading. A private smile tugged at his lips. Hands on the wall, legs spread, Kincaid ordered, unlocking the cell door. Behind him, a nervous-looking white officer, Glenn Rourke, stood at a careful distance, clipboard clutched to his chest. New fish, Kincaid explained, gesturing toward Rourke with his thumb. Learning the ropes. 2. Rourke, he added. This one fancies himself an intellectual, calls himself Teach. Ain't that cute? Ramsey's face remained impassive, eyes fixed on a point on the opposite wall. 6 months in SHU had taught him the value of invisibility. Reaction was currency he couldn't afford to spend. Kincaid methodically began tossing the cell, pulling the thin mattress from the metal bed frame, upending the small collection of toiletries, rifling through each book with deliberate roughness. He paused at a framed photograph, a middle-aged black man in a graduation cap and gown. Well, what do we have here? Kincaid held up the photo. This you, Ramsey? Professor of what exactly? Advanced felony? When Ramsey didn't respond, Kincaid stepped closer. I asked you a question, inmate. That was my graduation from Howard University, sir. I taught high school literature for 8 years. Ramsey's voice was soft but clear, his diction precise. A regular scholar, huh? Kincaid snorted, then let the frame slip from his fingers. The glass shattered on the concrete floor. Oops. Behind him, Rourke flinched but said nothing. Sir, may I clean that up? The glass could be hazardous. Ramsey's tone remained even. Hazardous, Kincaid repeated, drawing out each syllable mockingly. Listen to those $5 words. He turned to Rourke. See, this is what we get now. Educated inmates telling us how to do our jobs. Kincaid picked up Ramsey's copy of Foucault, flipping through pages dense with notes in the margins. What's this? Planning your dissertation behind bars? His thumb hooked under several pages, and with a quick motion he tore them free. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the small cell. Ramsey's jaw tightened imperceptibly, These books are approved materials, Sergeant, Ramsey said quietly. Purchased through the commissary. You think I give a damn what's approved? Kincaid stepped closer, his face inches from Ramsey's. You're no professor in here. You're just another number. A pretend intellectual playing make-believe until your sentence runs out, if it ever does. Ramsey held his gaze, revealing nothing, though something flickered deep in his eyes. Not fear, but something more dangerous. Patience. The cell block's intercom crackled to life. Sergeant Kincaid, report to administration for the new wardens. Tour. Repeat, Sergeant Kincaid to administration. Kincaid smiled thinly. Duty calls. He tossed the torn book onto the floor amid the shattered glass. Clean up this mess. I want it spotless when I get back. As he turned to leave, he added to Rourke, write him up for possessing contraband materials. Sir? Rourke asked, confused. But you said those were approved. Glass shards are contraband. Kincaid cut him off. And potentially a weapon. 3 days without yard privileges. Ramsey's expression didn't change, but his eyes followed Kincaid as he exited the cell. Only when the guard was several paces down the corridor did he kneel to gather the pieces of his broken photograph. I'm sorry about your picture, Rourke whispered, barely audible. Ramsey didn't look up. You have nothing to be sorry for, Officer Rourke. Not yet. The administrative wing of Coldwater was a different universe from the SHU, carpet instead, of concrete natural light streaming through windows, the smell of coffee replacing the stench of industrial disinfectant. Warden Carol Danner stood in the conference room surrounded by facility maps and statistical projections. At 52, Danner was a slender woman with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob. She'd spent 20 years in corrections administration, the last 5 turning around troubled facilities. Coldwater was her biggest challenge yet. Sergeant Kincaid, she acknowledged as he entered. Thank you for joining us. Kincaid stood at a military rest position. Ma'am. I was just reviewing the SHU occupancy rates. They're nearly double the state average. She gestured to a graph. And the average stay is triple the recommended duration. We have a difficult population, Warden, Kincaid replied smoothly. The SHU is essential for maintaining order. Order through fear isn't sustainable, Sergeant. Danner's eyes narrowed slightly. It's also becoming a legal liability. We've had 3 lawsuits filed in the past year alone. Inmates file frivolous suits all the time, ma'am. These weren't frivolous. 2 have been picked up by the Southern Poverty Law Center. She pulled out a folder. I've been reviewing disciplinary reports. There's a disturbing pattern of infractions, among black inmates specifically. Care to explain? Kincaid's face remained impassive. Statistics can be misleading, Warden. I enforce the rules equally. I'm sure you believe that, Danner said, her tone making it clear she didn't. Nevertheless, changes are coming. Starting next week, all SHU officers will wear body cameras during shifts. Disciplinary reports will be audited weekly. Random inspections of SHU cells will be conducted by my office without prior notice. Kincaid's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Warden, these measures will undermine officer authority. The inmates will see it as weakness. Accountability isn't weakness, Sergeant. It's professionalism. Danner closed her folder. Oh, and I'm assigning Officer Rourke to shadow you for the next month. Fresh eyes can be valuable. Rourke is inexperienced, which makes him ideal. He hasn't developed habits yet. Danner's gaze was direct. These changes aren't up for debate, Sergeant. They're happening. I suggest you adapt. In the officer's break room, Kincaid slammed his locker shut, the metal door reverberating against the frame. Fucking body cams, he muttered. Like we're the criminals. CO Trent Mallory, a squat man with 20 years at Coldwater etched into his weathered face, leaned against the adjacent locker. New warden's got her panties in a twist, huh? She's talking about reducing SU sentences, more oversight, fucking audits. Kincaid poured himself coffee, black and bitter. My old man ran this place for 15 years without anyone second-guessing how he handled discipline. Different times, Mallory agreed. Now we've got bleeding hearts worried about inmate feelings. Next thing, they'll want us to tuck him in at night. Kincaid stared into his coffee. It's all political. State gets pressure from advocacy groups, sends in Danner to make it look like they care. So what are you gonna do? Mallory lowered his voice. Just bend over and take it? Hell no. Kincaid's eyes hardened. These reforms only work if inmates think they have protection. Once they realize nothing's really changed, order returns. And how exactly do you plan to show them that? Kincaid smiled coldly. By making an example. Someone they respect. Ramsey, Mallory guessed, nodding slowly. Smart choice. Quiet ones like him have influence. Break him, you break their spirit. Exactly. Kincaid drained his coffee. I just need to find the right moment, the right setup. Outside the break room window, the SHU yard was visible, a concrete rectangle where inmates exercised in individual cages. In one, Malik Ramsey stood perfectly still, face tilted up toward the weak Mississippi sun, eyes closed as if absorbing every available ray of light. Watching him, Kincaid felt a familiar contempt rise in his chest. The man's composure was an affront, a challenge that demanded response. Those body cams won't be installed until next Tuesday, Mallory noted, following Kincaid's gaze. Gives you almost a week to establish boundaries. Kincaid nodded slowly, a plan already taking shape. Time to remind everyone who really runs Coldwater. The SU control room hummed with the constant drone of surveillance equipment, 12 monitors displaying grainy feeds from the isolation wing. Kincaid leaned against the console, watching Officer Rourke fidget with his collar. The younger man's discomfort was palpable. How long you been at Coldwater now, Rourke? Kincaid asked, his tone deceptively casual. 3 months, sir. Rourke's eyes darted to the monitor showing Ramsey's cell. The inmate sat cross-legged on his bunk reading a replacement book the chaplain had brought him. You like it here? Kincaid pressed, studying Rourke's face. It's a job, sir. Just a job? Kincaid's voice hardened. My father gave 30 years to this place. My grandfather helped build it. This isn't just a job, it's a calling. We keep society safe from animals who'd tear it apart given half a chance. Rourke shifted uncomfortably. Yes, sir. Kincaid moved closer, lowering his voice. You saw Ramsey yesterday. All calm and collected. Know why that's dangerous? Rourke hesitated. I'm not sure I follow, Sergeant. Influence. Kincaid tapped the screen showing Ramsey. Guys like him, they're the real threat. Not the muscleheads or the gangbangers, the thinkers. They stir up trouble, convince other inmates the system's against them. He seemed peaceful, Rourke ventured. Kincaid's laugh was sharp. That's the act. Underneath, they're all the same, violent when cornered. He straightened up, and I'm about to prove it to you. Before Rourke could respond, the control room door opened, and Mallory entered, giving Kincaid a subtle nod. Everything's set, Mallory muttered, barely audible. Good. Kincaid checked his watch. We're doing a cell extraction training today, Rourke. Hands-on experience. Sir? Rourke's voice betrayed his anxiety. Don't worry. Just follow my lead. 15 minutes later, the 3 officers stood in the sterile corridor outside Ramsey's cell. The inmate looked up from his book, his expression wary but composed. Ramsey, Kincaid announced. Random contraband search, hands on the wall. I was searched yesterday, Sergeant. Ramsey replied evenly. That a refusal to comply? Kincaid's hand moved to his radio. Ramsey carefully placed his book down and assumed the position. Kincaid nodded to Mallory, who entered the cell first. With practiced efficiency, Mallory began searching while Kincaid kept watch. Rourke stood awkwardly in the doorway. Get in here, rookie, Kincaid ordered. Learn something. As Rourke stepped forward, Kincaid subtly nudged him, a light push that sent the younger officer stumbling into Ramsey's back. What happened next was a blur of orchestrated chaos. Kincaid yanked Rourke backward, shouting, He's resisting! while Mallory moved in, pressing Ramsey hard against the wall. In the same motion, Kincaid pulled a shiv, fashioned from a sharpened plastic spoon, from his pocket and slipped it into Mallory's hand, who then tucked it under Ramsey's thin mattress. "Get off me," Ramsey protested, his voice steady even, as Mallory twisted his arm. "I'm not resisting." "He attacked Rourke," Kincaid shouted for the benefit of anyone within earshot. "Cuff him." Rourke stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion. "But he didn't." "Cuff him now, officer." Kincaid's voice left no room for debate. Mallory already had Ramsey's hands behind his back, the cuffs clicking into place with mechanical finality. "Check under the mattress," Kincaid ordered, directing his words at Rourke. When Rourke hesitated, Mallory did it himself, making a show of discovering the shiv. "Well, what do we have here? Looks like our professor's been doing some extracurricular activities." Ramsey's eyes locked with Kincaid's, comprehension dawning. "This is a setup." "Add threatening an officer to the charges," Kincaid replied coldly. To the others he barked, "Take him to disciplinary segregation. No privileges, no visitation." As they dragged Ramsey from his cell, Kincaid grabbed the inmate's book and tossed it into the corridor. "Won't be needing this where you're going." Ramsey maintained his dignity even as they pulled him away, his voice carrying down the hall. "The truth doesn't stay buried in places like this, Sergeant." When they were alone in the now empty cell, Kincaid turned to Rourke, whose face had gone pale. "You look sick, officer." He didn't attack me," Rourke managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "He made an aggressive move when you entered the cell. I saw it clearly." Kincaid's tone was matter-of-fact. "That's what your report will say. But that's not what happened. Let me explain something." Kincaid cut him off, stepping closer. "There are two kinds of officers at Coldwater, those who understand how things work, and those who don't last 6 months. Which are you?" The threat hung in the air between them. "I have a wife," Rourke said quietly. "A baby on the way." "Then you understand what's at stake." Kincaid nodded, satisfied. "Take a couple hours before you write up your statement. Clear your head." As Kincaid left the cell, he added casually, "Oh, and Rourke, the cameras in this section have been glitching all morning. Technical difficulties. Shame they didn't catch the incident." In the disciplinary segregation unit, a lightless section of cells below the main SHU floor, Ramsey sat in total darkness. They'd taken his clothes, leaving him in a paper gown, the concrete floor cold beneath him. No mattress, no books, no human contact, just four walls and his own thoughts for company. He'd been here before, not this exact cell, but this darkness, this isolation. He closed his eyes, though it made no difference in the pitch black, and began to recite from memory. "Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Minds innocent and quiet, take that for an hermitage." The rhythm of the poem steadied him. He'd taught these lines to students once, never imagining he'd test their truth firsthand. A scraping sound at the cell door interrupted his recitation. A small slot opened, and a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, momentarily blinding him. "Ramsey?" A hushed voice came through the slot. "It's Chaplain Brooks." "Chaplain?" Ramsey shielded his eyes. "Didn't expect visitors in the hole." "I heard what happened." Isaiah Brooks's deep voice carried concern. "They're saying you attacked Officer Rourke." "We both know that's not true." A pause. "Kincaid's got the young officer ready to testify against you. He's scared," Ramsey said, not unkindly. "I don't blame him." The light shifted as Brooks leaned closer to the slot. "This could add years to your sentence, Malik." "I know. I'll speak to Warden Danner. She's different from the last one. Might." "Actually, listen." Ramsey moved closer to the door. "Be careful, Chaplain. Kincaid has allies throughout Coldwater." "I've survived worse than Kincaid," Brooks replied, his voice carrying the weight of a past Ramsey had only heard rumors about. The gang life before ministry, the bullets he'd taken in a drive-by that had led to his conversion. "Truth always rises," Brooks added softly, "like cream to the top, or a body in water." The morbid metaphor hung between them. "They can only keep you down here 3 days without official charges," Brooks continued. "I'll check on you tomorrow." As the slot closed, plunging Ramsey back into darkness, he returned to his recitation. "If I have freedom in my love and in my soul am free, angels alone that soar above enjoy such liberty." The words were a thread connecting him to his former life, to classrooms and literature discussions, to a world beyond concrete and cruelty. In the warden's office, Carol Danner scrolled through disciplinary reports with growing concern. The incident with Ramsey was the third assault on an officer in 2 weeks, all involving black inmates with previously clean records. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter." Kincaid stepped in, his posture rigid. "You wanted to see me, Warden?" "Yes, Sergeant. Have a seat." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I'm reviewing the incident report on inmate Ramsey. Officer Rourke's statement seems inconsistent." "In what way?" Kincaid's face betrayed nothing. "He describes Ramsey as possibly making an aggressive movement, yet you report a direct assault attempt." She looked up from the file. "That's quite a discrepancy. Rourke is inexperienced. He might not have recognized the danger until I intervened." "And the contraband weapon?" "Found under the mattress during the subsequent search." Danner leaned back in her chair. "I'd like to review the surveillance footage." A flicker, so brief she almost missed it, crossed Kincaid's face. "Unfortunately, there was a system malfunction in that section yesterday. It is looking into it." "How convenient." Danner's tone made it clear she didn't believe in such coincidences. "And the body cameras I requested?" "Not yet implemented, ma'am. Scheduled for next week as you instructed." Danner closed the file. "I want Ramsey brought to my office tomorrow. I'd like to hear his version of events." "With all due respect, Warden, interviewing an inmate who assaulted staff sends a dangerous message." "Your concern is noted, Sergeant." Her tone was steel. "But this is not a request. 10 a.m. tomorrow." After Kincaid left, Danner picked up her phone and dialed the IT department. "This is Warden Danner. I need a complete audit of yesterday's surveillance system malfunction, every detail, every timestamp, and I want Officer Glenn Rourke in my office in an hour." In the officer's locker room, Rourke splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the streaked mirror. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hadn't slept since the incident. "You look like shit," Mallory remarked, entering behind him. Rourke didn't respond. "First time's always rough," Mallory continued, opening his locker. "Gets easier." "Does it?" Rourke's voice was hollow. "Filing false reports gets easier?" Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth, rookie. Walls have ears." "This isn't right." Rourke lowered his voice to a whisper. "Ramsey didn't do anything." "Ramsey's not the point." Mallory stepped closer. "Order is the point. Respect is the point. You think inmates will respect a system they can manipulate? Is that what this is about? Respect? It's about survival." Mallory's voice hardened. "You think this place runs on rules? It runs on fear. Fear keeps the animals in line. Fear keeps us alive." Rourke turned away, but Mallory grabbed his arm. "Kincaid told me the warden wants to see you. Remember our conversation? Remember your pregnant wife?" He released Rourke's arm. "We clear?" Rourke nodded mutely, though the sickness in his stomach had only intensified. As Mallory left, Rourke took one last look in the mirror. The face staring back seemed to belong to someone else, someone weaker than he'd believed himself to be, someone who had crossed a line he'd never imagined crossing. He thought of Ramsey, sitting in darkness, of the shiv planted under the mattress, of the lies in his report. Most of all, he thought of his unborn child and wondered what he would tell them someday about the kind of man their father had been. In the administrative wing, Warden Danner sat at her desk reviewing personnel files when her assistant buzzed the intercom. "Officer Rourke is here, ma'am." "Send him in." Rourke entered, his uniform crisp but his face haggard. "Have a seat, officer." Danner gestured to the chair across from her. Rourke sat stiffly, his hands clasped in his lap to hide their trembling. "I've been reviewing your file," Danner began. "Top of your training class. Exemplary recommendations. You requested assignment to Coldwater specifically." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. It was closest to my home. My wife's expecting our first child." Danner nodded. "Congratulations." She closed the file. "I want to discuss your incident report regarding inmate Ramsey." Rourke's throat went dry. "Yes, ma'am." "Your account differs significantly from Sergeant Kincaid's. He describes a clear assault attempt. You describe a possible aggressive movement. Which is it, Officer Rourke?" He stared at his hands. Mallory's warning echoed in his mind, alongside the image of his wife, her belly swollen with their child. But louder still was his father's voice from childhood. "A man who stands for nothing falls for anything." "Officer Rourke," Danner pressed, "I need an answer." Rourke looked up, his decision made in that moment. "The truth, Warden?" Something in his tone made her lean forward. "Always the truth, officer." There was no assault, no aggressive movement. The words tumbled out now. Ramsey complied with every order. The weapon was planted, the entire incident was staged. Danner's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "That's a serious allegation. Are you prepared to put that in writing?" Rourke thought of everything at stake, his job, his reputation, perhaps even his safety. But he also thought of Ramsey, falsely accused and sitting in darkness. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "I am." Danner nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then we have a great deal to discuss, Officer Rourke." Outside the warden's office, neither of them noticed Trent Mallory lingering near the water cooler, close enough to catch fragments of their conversation through the partially open door. His face darkened as he pulled out his radio, pressing the call button. "Kincaid," he muttered, "we have a problem." The conference room in Coldwater's administrative wing had been transformed into a war room. Case files were spread across the table, surveillance logs stacked in chronological order, and a whiteboard displayed a timeline of incidents under Kincaid's supervision. Warden Danner stood at the head of the table, flanked by a state corrections investigator and a stern-faced woman in a tailored suit, Paula Martinez, legal counsel for the Southern Poverty Law Center. "Officer Rourke's sworn statement is damning," Martinez said, tapping a document. "Combined with the statistical anomalies and disciplinary actions against black inmates, we have a clear pattern of abuse." "And motive," Danner added. "Kincaid was actively undermining my reforms." The corrections investigator, a barrel-chested man named Wilson, nodded grimly. "What about the surveillance footage? Kincaid claimed there was a malfunction." "There was," Danner replied, "but not when," he claimed. "Our IT audit shows the system was manually disabled 5 minutes before the alleged assault and reactivated 20 minutes after. The login used belonged to Lieutenant Hardy, who was on vacation that day." "Meaning someone used his credentials," Martinez concluded. "Exactly." Danner slid another file across the table. "And there's more. We've identified at least 12 cases in the past year where inmates were sent to disciplinary segregation after allegedly assaulting staff. No injuries to officers, no witnesses beyond Kincaid or officers loyal to him, and all involving black inmates with clean disciplinary records." "Jesus," Wilson muttered. "We need to move quickly," Martinez urged. "Every day these men spend in segregation compounds the civil rights violations." Danner nodded. "I've already ordered Ramsey's release back to general population. As for Kincaid..." A sharp knock interrupted her. Her assistant opened the door, expression tense. "Sorry to interrupt, Warden, but there's a situation. CO Mallory is requesting protective custody. Says he has information about Sergeant Kincaid in exchange for immunity from prosecution." Danner's eyes narrowed. "Bring him in." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. CO Trent Mallory had never looked smaller than he did sitting alone at the conference table, his usual swagger replaced by nervous fidgeting. "Let's be clear," Danner began. "I'm not offering any deals, but cooperation will be noted." Mallory licked his lips. "I wanted on record that Kincaid was the ringleader. Everything was his idea." "Start from the beginning," Wilson prompted. "Kincaid's been running SU his way for years," Mallory explained. "His father was warden here back when different standards applied. Ray grew up believing certain inmates, especially the black ones, needed extra control." "You mean abuse?" Martinez corrected coldly. Mallory shrugged. "Call it what you want." When you announced the reforms, he glanced at Danner. Kincaid saw it as undermining his authority. He picked Ramsey to make an example. "Why Ramsey specifically?" "Because inmates respect him. He's quiet, but they listen when he talks. Kincaid figured if he could break Ramsey, the others would fall in line." "And you helped him," Danner stated flatly. Mallory's eyes dropped to the table. "I did what was expected." "Expected?" Martinez's voice was sharp with disgust. "You don't understand how it works in places like this," Mallory shot back. "You cross the wrong people. Suddenly no one has your back when a fight breaks out. Equipment malfunctions. Requests get lost." "So you helped frame an innocent man to protect yourself," Danner summarized. "I'm here now, aren't I?" Mallory's defiance crumbled under their collective gaze. "Look, I'll testify. I'll give you names of everyone involved. Just keep me away from Gen Pop when this goes public." Danner exchanged glances with Wilson and Martinez. "We'll need everything in writing. Every detail, every incident, every officer involved." After Mallory was escorted out, Martinez turned to Danner. "What about Kincaid?" "I want him suspended immediately pending termination," Danner decided. "But given what we're uncovering, I'm concerned about his safety if word gets out." "You think he's at risk from other officers?" Wilson asked. "Officers? Inmates with connections on the outside. Kincaid has made many enemies." Danner's expression was grim. "We need to place him in administrative segregation until the investigation concludes." "You're putting him in SU?" Martinez couldn't hide her surprise. "For his own protection," Danner replied, though something in her tone suggested justice had found its poetic form. Ray Kincaid's world imploded with startling swiftness. One moment he was reviewing duty rosters in his office. The next, 2 state correctional officers he didn't recognize were standing in his doorway, accompanied by Warden Danner. "Sergeant Kincaid," she announced formally. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into serious allegations of misconduct and civil rights violations." Kincaid stood slowly, his face a mask. "What allegations?" "Multiple counts of falsifying official reports, planting contraband, orchestrating assaults, racial discrimination." Danner began listing. "This is ridiculous," Kincaid cut her off. "Who's making these claims?" "Inmates? They'll say anything to—" "Officer Glenn Rourke and CO Trent Mallory have provided sworn statements," Danner interrupted, "along with documentation and corroborating testimony from multiple sources." The color drained from Kincaid's face. "Mallory? That's impossible. Please surrender your badge, keys, and radio," one of the state officers instructed. Kincaid's hand moved instinctively to his hip where his keys jangled, the sound that had announced his authority for years. "This is a mistake. These officers will escort you to processing." Danner continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Given the nature of the allegations and concerns for your safety, you'll be held in administrative segregation until the investigation concludes." The words took a moment to penetrate. "Administrative segregation? You're putting me in SU?" His voice rose. "You can't do that. I'm an officer." "You're suspended," Danner corrected. "And this is standard procedure when staff face serious allegations." "This is bullshit," Kincaid's composure finally cracked. "My father built this place. You can't treat me like a goddamn inmate." The state officers moved forward, one on each side. "Sir, please come with us. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." As they led him from his office, Kincaid caught sight of officers in the corridor, men and women he'd worked alongside for years. Some looked away. Others watched with undisguised satisfaction. Not one moved to support him. Processing was a blur of humiliation. The same procedures Kincaid had overseen hundreds of times were now applied to him. Personal items, inventoried. Uniform exchanged for an orange jumpsuit, fingerprints taken, medical screening conducted. Each step stripped away another layer of his identity until only raw anger remained. "Arms out," the intake officer instructed mechanically. Kincaid complied, jaw clenched so tight pain shot through his temples. "Turn around, hands behind your back." The cold metal of handcuffs, his tool of control for so long, now bit into his own wrists. The irony wasn't lost on him, fueling a rage that threatened to explode with each passing moment. "Is this really necessary?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Standard procedure for all segregation transports," the officer replied, echoing words Kincaid himself had used countless times. They led him through a series of secure doors deeper into the facility, the same route he'd taken hundreds of inmates over the years. Now he walked it in shackles, painfully aware of the eyes tracking his journey. The final door opened to reveal the shoe corridor, his former domain. As they led him down the hallway, inmates pressed against their cell doors, fingers curling, through the narrow slots. "Look who it is," a voice called out. "Not so big now, are you, Kincaid?" another taunted. "Karma's a bitch, ain't it?" The officers escorting him kept their eyes forward, moving efficiently, offering no protection from the verbal assault. Kincaid kept his gaze on the floor, refusing to acknowledge the jeers, though each barbed comment landed like a physical blow. They stopped at cell 2112, at the far end of the corridor where the fluorescent light flickered intermittently. One of the officers unlocked the door. "In you go," he said, no emotion coloring the instruction. Kincaid hesitated at the threshold, reality crashing down around him. This cell, identical to dozens he'd locked men into, now yawned before him like a tomb. "Move," the second officer ordered, patience thinning. Kincaid stepped inside. The cell door closed behind him with the same metallic finality he'd inflicted on others. The handcuffs were removed through the slot, and then he was alone. The cell was standard SHU issue. Concrete bunk with a thin mattress, stainless steel toilet sink combination, small metal desk bolted to the wall. The walls were etched with years of messages, names, dates, crude images, desperate declarations of innocence or threats of revenge. Kincaid stood motionless in the center of the 8x10 space, the reality of his situation still not fully penetrating the shock. A voice from the cell next door broke through his daze. "Welcome to the other side, Sergeant." Kincaid moved to the wall. "Who's that?" A low chuckle was the only response. In a different section of the issue, Malik Ramsey sat on his bunk, carefully repairing the torn pages of his book with thin strips of adhesive from the chaplain's office. His return to his original cell had been accompanied by an official apology from Warden Danner, and news that his case was being reviewed for possible early release consideration. A soft tap on his cell door drew his attention. Through the narrow window, he saw the face of Deshaun Mook Wallace, one of the few inmates allowed limited movement within SHU due to his work as a janitor, a privilege earned through years of perfect behavior. "Teach," Mook's deep voice was barely audible through the door. "You hear what happened? About Kincaid?" Ramsey nodded. "The chaplain told me. They got him in 2112, end of C wing." Mook's muscular frame seemed too large for the small window frame. Words spreading fast. "I imagine it is." Mook studied Ramsey's calm expression. "You don't seem surprised." "Corruption always reveals itself eventually." Ramsey carefully smoothed another repaired page. "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." "Martin Luther King," Mook identified the quote. "But sometimes that arc needs a little push, right?" Ramsey set his book aside. "What are you suggesting, Deshaun?" "Nothing, yet." Mook glanced down the corridor to ensure no officers were nearby. "But Kincaid hurt a lot of brothers in here, made some suffer for no reason except the color of their skin. Some folks think paybacks do. Violence would only vindicate him, Ramsey cautioned. Prove his worldview right. Who said anything about violence? Mook's smile was cold. There are other ways to break a man. Ramsey stood, moving closer to the door. Like what? SHU? Tactics, the same shit he used on us. Sleep deprivation, isolation, mind games. Mook lowered his voice further. I got access to most of the wing during cleanup. Guards are looking the other way. They don't give a damn about protecting Kincaid. Ramsey was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally he asked, Why come to me with this? Because folks listen to you. They respect you. If you're in, others will follow your lead. Mook held his gaze. This might be the only chance we get to show him what it feels like, to make him understand. Understanding can't be forced, Ramsey said quietly. It has to be earned through experience. That's exactly what I'm talking about, giving him the experience. Mook checked the corridor again. I gotta move. Think about it, Teach. After Mook left, Ramsey returned to his bunk, but the book remained untouched in his lap. His thoughts turned to Kincaid, the man who had torn his books, broken his photograph, humiliated him in front of others. The man who had tried to add years to his sentence through false accusations. The man who now sat in a cell just like this. One, experiencing for the first time the crushing weight of confinement without power. Ramsey closed his eyes, searching his conscience. There was a line between justice and vengeance, a line he had always been careful not to cross. But he couldn't deny the bitter satisfaction he felt knowing Kincaid was now subject to the same system he had weaponized against others. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. Night in the SHU was its own unique torment. Darkness never truly fell. The harsh fluorescent lights dimmed but didn't extinguish, creating a perpetual twilight that made real sleep nearly impossible. For Kincaid, this first night stretched endlessly, each minute crawling by with excruciating slowness. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through the events that had led him here. Betrayal burned in his chest, Mallory turning on him, the other officers' silent satisfaction, the institution he'd given his life to casting him aside. A soft tapping interrupted his thoughts, a rhythmic pattern against the pipes that ran through the cells. He'd heard inmates using the pipes to communicate before but had never deciphered their code. Now the tapping seemed to surround him, coming from multiple directions, forming patterns he couldn't interpret but somehow knew were about him. "Shut up," he shouted, slamming his palm against the wall. The tapping ceased immediately, replaced by silence so complete it seemed deliberate. Then, just as he began to relax, it started again. Softer, more distant, but unmistakably coordinated. Kincaid pressed his pillow against his ears, but the sound penetrated even that feeble barrier. It continued for hours, stopping just long, enough for him to begin drifting toward sleep before resuming with renewed intensity. By morning, his eyes were red-rimmed and burning. The breakfast tray arrived through the slot, the same unappetizing meal he'd watched served thousands of times without a second thought. Now, as he stared at the cold oatmeal and stale bread, his stomach turned. "How'd you sleep, Kincaid?" The voice came from the correctional officer delivering breakfast, a young black man named Washington whom Kincaid barely recognized. "The tapping," Kincaid croaked. "It went on all night." Washington's face revealed nothing. "What tapping?" "It was quiet as a church in here." "Bullshit. They were using the pipes to—" "Nobody reported any noise." Washington cut him off. "Maybe you're hearing things. Stress can do that to a person." Before Kincaid could respond, Washington moved on, leaving him alone with his untouched breakfast, and the dawning realization that the rules had changed. He was no longer the one who determined what was real or imagined, what would be reported or ignored. He was now subject to the same capricious authority he had wielded for so long. At the far end of the corridor, Malik Ramsey received his own breakfast tray from Officer Washington, who paused longer than necessary at his cell. "Package from the chaplain," Washington said, sliding a small paper bag through the slot along with the tray. Ramsey opened it to find a new journal and several pencils. Chaplain thought you might want to document recent events. Washington added meaningfully, for perspective. Thank him for me, Ramsey replied, understanding the subtext. Washington nodded, then lowered his voice. He's not doing so good. Complained about noises all night. Is that right? Ramsey's expression remained neutral. Mooks, on cleanup in an hour. Said to tell you everything's ready. Washington stepped back from the door. I don't know what y'all are planning, and I don't want to know. Just keep it quiet and leave no trace. As Washington continued his rounds, Ramsey opened the new journal to its first blank page. At the top, he wrote a single line. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? The words of Langston Hughes seemed fitting for what was to come. A reckoning long delayed, but now, finally at hand. In her office, Warden Danner reviewed the overnight logs from the SHU with a growing sense of unease. Nothing specific stood out, no incidents, no altercations reported, but something in the carefully neutral language felt deliberate, as if the officers were documenting only what they wanted on record. A knock at her door preceded Glenn Rourke's entrance. The young officer looked marginally better than he had days earlier, though guilt still shadowed his eyes. You wanted to see me, Warden? Yes. Danner gestured to the chair across from her desk. I wanted to update you on the investigation. Your testimony has been corroborated by Mallory and 2 other officers who've since come forward. The state attorney's office is preparing formal charges against Kincaid. Rourke nodded, relief evident in his posture. And Ramsey? Released, back to his regular cell with an official apology. His case is being reviewed for possible early release. Danner studied Rourke's face. But that's not why I called you here. Ma'am, I need someone I can trust to monitor the situation in SHU. Someone who'll report to me directly on how Kincaid is being treated. She leaned forward. The correctional system can't function on vengeance, Officer Rourke. Not if we want it to. Be better than what Kincaid represented. Understanding dawned in Rourke's eyes. You think the other officers are allowing inmates to retaliate? I think human nature being what it is, there might be a temptation to look the other way. Danner's gaze was direct. I need to know if lines are being crossed. Rourke hesitated. With respect, Warden, I may not be the best person for this. After what happened, many officers see me as a traitor. Or as someone with integrity, Danner countered. Either way, you'll have access where I might not. Will you do it? After a long moment, Rourke nodded. I'll try, ma'am. As he left the office, Rourke felt the weight of his new assignment settle, alongside his existing guilt. He had finally chosen a side, chosen truth over complicity, but the path forward remained treacherously unclear. In cell 2112, Ray Kincaid sat with his back against the cold concrete wall, exhaustion pulling at him. The day had passed in a haze of disorienting monotony, broken only by the silent delivery of meals and the distant sounds of the SHU's routine. No one had spoken to him. No one had acknowledged his questions about when he would be released or what was happening with the investigation. It was as if he had become a ghost, visible but impossible to hear. The isolation was a familiar tactic, one he had employed countless times. Create uncertainty, remove predictability, eliminate human contact, break down resistance through sensory deprivation. Knowing the strategy didn't make it less effective. A shadow passed across his cell door, pausing briefly. Kincaid looked up to see a face he recognized immediately. Deshaun Wallace, known as Mook, a powerfully built inmate whose gang credentials had earned him both respect and fear within Coldwater's walls. Look at you, Mook said, his deep voice carrying easily through the door. Sergeant Kincaid, the big man, not so big now, huh? Kincaid stood, moving to the door. You got something to say to me, Wallace? Just observing. Mook's smile was cold, wondering how it feels to be on that side of the door. If you're here to threaten me. Threaten? Mook laughed. Nah, man, that's your style, not ours. What's that supposed to mean? It means we're not you. Mook leaned closer, to the window. We don't need to hurt people to feel powerful, we just need them to understand. Before Kincaid could respond, another figure appeared behind Mook. Malik Ramsey, his calm presence a stark contrast to Mook's intimidating physicality. That's enough, Deshaun, Ramsey said quietly. Mook stepped back, deferring to Ramsey with surprising respect. Just saying hello to our new neighbor. Ramsey moved to the door, his eyes meeting Kincaid's through the narrow window. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. What do you want, Ramsey? Kincaid finally asked, unable to maintain the silence. Nothing, Ramsey replied simply. I just wanted to see. See what? If you understand yet. Ramsey's voice was devoid of anger or triumph, just a quiet curiosity. But I can see you don't. Not yet. Understand what? Kincaid demanded. But Ramsey had already turned away, Mook falling into step beside him as they disappeared from view. Kincaid pounded his fist against the door in frustration, the sound echoing hollowly down the corridor. No one responded, no one came to investigate. In that moment, he fully grasped his new reality. He was no longer the one who decided which cries for help deserved response, which displays of emotion warranted attention. He was now subject to the whims of those he had once controlled, invisible when they chose not to see him, inaudible when they chose not to hear. He was under SHU law now, and the rules were about to change. Time lost meaning first. 3 days into his confinement, Ray Kincaid noticed the clock outside his cell had stopped at 3:17. Whether AM or PM was impossible to tell under the SHU's perpetual artificial twilight. When he asked Officer Washington about it, the response was a non-committal shrug. Put in a maintenance request, Washington suggested, knowing full well such requests from segregation inmates often disappeared into administrative purgatory. The fluorescent light in Kincaid's cell developed a stutter, 15 seconds of brightness followed by 10 seconds of dimness, repeating in an irregular pattern just rhythmic enough to prevent adaptation. The flickering cast-moving shadows that danced at the edges of his vision, phantom movements that repeatedly triggered his instinctive alertness. Sleep came in fragments, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, never enough to reach the restorative depths his body craved. The light's malfunctioning, he reported during morning count. Maintenance has been notified, came the reply, delivered with the same detached professionalism he had once used himself. Kincaid knew what was happening. He'd orchestrated similar conditions for particularly resistant inmates: sensory disruption, circadian manipulation, environmental stress, classic SHU tactics. But knowing didn't make it easier to endure. On the fourth night, the noises began in earnest, soft at first, almost subliminal. A faint tapping that traveled through the pipes, the distant sound of metal scraping against concrete, whispers that seemed to emanate from the ventilation system, too indistinct to decipher but too persistent to ignore. Kincaid pressed his ear against the wall, straining to make sense of the sounds. They stopped immediately, as if responding to his attention, only to resume minutes later from a different direction. Someone's messing with the pipes, he reported during breakfast delivery. Nobody's reported any disturbances, Officer Jenkins replied. The same answer he'd received about every complaint. The meal schedule became unpredictable. Breakfast might arrive at 5 a.m. or 9 a.m. Lunch could be early or skipped entirely. Dinner sometimes came in the middle of the night. The disruption of such a basic routine, meal times, further distorted his sense of time passing. His requests to speak with Warden Danner went unanswered. His demands for a disciplinary hearing were met with vague reassurances that the process is ongoing. 7 days in, during what passed for night in SHU, a new sound cut through the darkness. A voice barely audible, reciting what sounded like a list of names. Marcus Johnson, Darrell Wright, Terrell Booker. Kincaid sat up, straining to listen. Brandon Miles, Andre Simmons, Calvin Richardson. The names continued, a steady litany delivered in a soft monotone. Some sounded vaguely familiar, inmates who had passed through SHU during his tenure. What do you want? Kincaid called out, his voice hoarse from disuse. The recitation stopped instantly. Silence stretched for so long he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. Then, just as he began to lie back down, it resumed, softer but unmistakable. Leon Taylor, Michael Harris, DeAndre Phillips. The names continued until dawn, a ghostly roll call that followed him into his fitful dreams. Recreation time, 1 hour in a cage twice the size of his cell, became an exercise in silent intimidation. Mook Wallace was always there, mopping the corridor outside the rec cage, his presence a constant reminder of the power dynamics at play. During one session, Kincaid noticed Malik Ramsey in the adjacent recreation cage, calmly performing a series of yoga poses. "You're behind this," Kincaid accused through the chain link separating them. Ramsey completed his movement before responding. "Behind what exactly?" "The noises, the lights, the mind games." Ramsey regarded him with something resembling curiosity. "Interesting that you immediately recognize them as mind games. Almost as if you're familiar with the tactics." "I want it to stop," Kincaid demanded. "I imagine many inmates wanted things to stop as well." Ramsey's voice remained even. "Did you listen when they asked?" Before Kincaid could respond, Ramsey turned away, resuming his exercises as if the conversation had never occurred. Later that day, a book appeared on Kincaid's bunk during dinner delivery, Foucault's Discipline and Punish, the same book he had torn apart in Ramsey's cell. Several pages were still visibly mended with thin strips of tape. Inside the front cover, a single line was written in neat script: "The prison cannot fail to produce delinquents." Kincaid hurled the book against the wall. "I don't want your goddamn book," he shouted into the empty corridor. His only answer was distant laughter, quickly hushed. 10 days in, the chaplain appeared at his cell door. Isaiah Brooks was a tall man, with graying temples and patient eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "Sergeant Kincaid," he greeted, his deep voice resonant. "I'm here for our scheduled visit." "I didn't schedule a visit," Kincaid replied warily. "Nevertheless, here I am." Brooks smiled slightly. "Unless you'd prefer no visitors at all?" Kincaid hesitated, then stepped back from the door. "Fine." The cell door opened, the first time since his placement, and Brooks entered, carrying a small Bible. The door locked behind him. "How are you holding up?" Brooks asked, taking a seat on the metal desk bolted to the wall. "How do you think?" Kincaid's laugh was bitter. "They're playing games with me. The lights, the sounds at night. I've heard similar complaints from other inmates over the years," Brooks remarked casually. "Interesting to experience it from the other side, I imagine." Kincaid's eyes narrowed. "You too? Everyone seems to think this is some kind of poetic justice. Isn't it, though?" Brooks opened his Bible. "There's a passage that comes to mind. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." "I don't need a sermon." "What do you need, Ray?" Brooks asked, using Kincaid's first name deliberately. The question caught Kincaid off guard. What did he need? Sleep, quiet, predictability, human contact that wasn't laden with judgment or schadenfreude. "I need this to stop," he finally said, voice lower. "I need to know what's happening with my case. I need someone to actually listen." Brooks nodded. "All things inmates regularly requested from you, as I recall." Kincaid turned away. "I was doing my job." "Were you?" Brooks studied him. "Or were you doing something else entirely? Something personal? Something rooted in beliefs passed down from your father and his father before him?" "You don't know anything about my family." "I know enough." Brooks closed his Bible. "I know your grandfather helped build this place when Mississippi needed somewhere to put black men after Parchman became too crowded. I know your father ran it like his personal fiefdom for 15 years, and I know you followed in their footsteps without ever questioning the path." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "You done?" "Almost." Brooks stood, moving toward the door. The men you're hearing at night, those names being recited. Do you know who they are? Inmates, I guess. Men who took their own lives after extended stays, in SHU under your supervision. Brooks's eyes held his. Men who broke under the same tactics you're experiencing now. The words landed like physical blows. Kincaid sank onto his bunk, memories surfacing of incident reports filed and quickly forgotten. Suicide attempts dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. Bodies removed quietly during night shifts. That's not on me, he managed. They were weak. Is that what you tell yourself when you can't sleep at night? Brooks asked softly. Is that what you'll tell yourself when the voices get louder? He signaled for the door to be opened. Wait, Kincaid called as Brooks prepared to leave. Do you know when I'll get out of here? That depends. On what? On whether you learn what you need to learn. Brooks paused in the doorway. This isn't just punishment, Ray. It's an opportunity. A chance to see what you've been blind to all these years. And what's that? The humanity of the men you've locked away. The chaplain's voice was gentle but unyielding. Their suffering was real whether you acknowledged it or not. Now yours is too. As the door closed behind Brooks, the cell seemed smaller than before, the walls closer, the air thinner. Kincaid lay back on his bunk, the chaplain's words echoing in his mind alongside the strange recitation of names that had haunted his nights. For the first time, he wondered if those names belonged to real men, men whose final desperation he had dismissed with bureaucratic indifference. 2 weeks in, the hallucinations began. They started small, peripheral movements that vanished when directly observed. Shadows that seemed to breathe. The sensation of insects crawling across his skin during the night. Kincaid recognized the symptoms of extended sleep deprivation and sensory disruption. He'd read reports about them, dispassionately noting their effectiveness in breaking resistant inmates. Understanding the process didn't grant immunity to its effects. During one particularly bad night, after the lights had cycled between bright and dim for hours, he found himself conversing with his father, 12 years dead but somehow standing in the corner of his cell, uniform pressed and immaculate as always. You're a disappointment, the apparition told him. Letting these animals get the better of you. They're not animals, Kincaid found himself responding. They're inmates. His father's ghost laughed coldly. Now you sound like that bleeding heart. Chaplain, next you'll be saying they're people. They are people, Kincaid whispered, the admission emerging from some place he hadn't known existed within him. The hallucination vanished, leaving him alone with words he'd never thought he'd utter. The next morning, Kincaid tried once more to file a complaint about the nightly disturbances. The form was returned the following day with "no action required" stamped across it in red ink. In a moment of desperate frustration, he scrawled a message on the back of his breakfast tray. Tell Ramsey I want to talk. Hours passed with no response. Then, during the brief yard time, actually just a slightly larger cage at the end of the corridor, Ramsey appeared in the adjacent enclosure. You wanted to speak with me? Ramsey asked, his voice neutral. Kincaid gripped the chain, link separating them. Make it stop. The noises, the names at night. Why should I? The question contained no malice, only genuine curiosity. Because it's cruel, Kincaid answered without thinking. Yes, Ramsey agreed simply. It is. The implication hung between them undeniable in its clarity. Everything Kincaid now endured he had inflicted on others, often with far less purpose or restraint. I just want to sleep, Kincaid admitted, his voice cracking. Ramsey studied him for a long moment. The names you hear at night, do you remember them? Some sound familiar. They should. Each one passed through SHU under your supervision. Each one warned you they were at breaking point. Each one was ignored. I was doing my job, Kincaid insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Was your job to break men or to secure them? Ramsey asked. To punish or to rehabilitate? To enforce rules or to inflict suffering? Kincaid had no answer. The question isn't whether I'll make it stop, Ramsey continued. The question is whether you're ready to understand why it's happening. And if I say I understand? Words are easy. Understanding changes you. Ramsey stepped back from the fence. When you truly understand, you won't need to ask me to make it stop. You'll know how to end it yourself. As Ramsey walked away, Kincaid called after him. How? How do I end it? Ramsey paused, looking back over his shoulder. The same way any man finds peace, Sergeant. Through truth. That night, as Kincaid lay on his bunk, staring at the flickering light, the familiar recitation of names began. This time, rather than raging against it or covering his ears, he listened, really listened, to each name. Marcus Johnson, Darrell Wright, Terrell Booker. He found himself whispering along, memories surfacing of faces, infractions, incidents he had dismissed or forgotten. Brandon Miles, Andre Simmons. Brandon Miles, young kid, first offense, couldn't stop crying his first week in SHU. Kincaid had ordered his mattress removed as punishment for disruptive behavior. Calvin Richardson. Richardson had begged for his medication, claimed he heard voices without it. Kincaid had delayed its delivery, told him to man up. Name after name, face after face, men he had viewed as problems to be managed rather than humans in crisis. As the litany continued, something broke inside Ray Kincaid. Not with the violence of a shattered window, but with the quiet surrender of ice giving way to spring thaw. For the first time in 2 decades of corrections work, he allowed himself to see the inmates not as abstractions, numbers, charges, security risks, but as men. Flawed, damaged, sometimes dangerous men, but men nonetheless. The realization didn't bring immediate peace or absolution, but it opened a door, long sealed within him, a door leading to a different understanding of his life's work and the legacy he had inherited without question. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask for paper and a pen. It was time to face the truth, however painful it might be. As that thought formed, the recitation of names ceased as if responding to his internal shift. The light in his cell stabilized, the flickering suddenly gone. In the unexpected stillness, exhaustion claimed him at last, pulling him into the first unbroken sleep he'd had since entering SAU. His last conscious thought was of Ramsey's words. Through truth. Recreation hour had become Ray Kincaid's sole tether to sanity. 60 minutes in the slightly larger cage offered the illusion of movement, of agency, in a world otherwise reduced to the dimensions of his cell. On this day, his 17th in SHU, though he'd lost precise count, Kincaid paced the small enclosure, 7 steps in one direction, turn, 7 steps back. From the adjacent cage, an inmate watched him. Kincaid vaguely recognized the man. Curtis Jenkins, serving 20 years for armed robbery. Jenkins had been a frequent visitor to SHU during Kincaid's tenure as supervisor. Look at the mighty fallen, Jenkins remarked, voice pitched to carry just far enough. Sergeant Kincaid doing inmate laps. Kincaid continued pacing, determined to ignore the provocation. How's it feel being on the receiving end? Jenkins continued. Having your sleep fucked with, your food messed with, your head played with? 7 steps, turn, 7 steps, turn. You know what the difference is between you and us? Jenkins persisted. We did something to get in here. You just are what you are, a sadistic, racist piece of shit who finally got what was coming. 7 steps, turn, 7. Your daddy would be real proud, Jenkins added, his voice dropping to a mock confidential tone. Following the family tradition. Except now you're on the other side of the bars, just like your grandpappy was afraid of. Kincaid froze mid-step. What did you say about my grandfather? Jenkins smiled, seeing he'd struck a nerve. Everybody knows the story. How your granddaddy helped build this place because he was scared of black men being free. How your daddy ran it like his own personal plantation. You don't know anything about my family. Kincaid's voice was dangerously low. I know your granddaddy used to watch while inmates got beat half to death. I know your daddy kept a special room for troublemakers. Jenkins leaned closer to the fence separating them. And I know the apple didn't fall far from the lynching tree. Something snapped in Kincaid. Weeks of fear, isolation, and accumulated humiliation exploded in a surge of rage. He hurled himself at the chain link separating them, fingers clawing, through the metal diamonds reaching for Jenkins's throat. I'll kill you, he screamed, the words tearing from his throat. You hear me? I'll fucking kill you. Jenkins calmly stepped back, just out of reach, his mission accomplished. Alarms blared. Within seconds, a tactical team in riot gear swarmed the recreation area. Kincaid was wrestled to the ground, a knee in his back, zip ties cutting into his wrists. Through the confusion, he caught sight of Malik Ramsey watching from the corridor, his expression unreadable. He attacked me, Jenkins shouted, playing the victim with practiced conviction. Threatened to kill me. You all heard it. As they dragged Kincaid away, he heard the guards laughing, a sound he recognized from the other side, the dark amusement of power without accountability. The disciplinary cell was smaller than his regular one, with no window and no furniture save a concrete slab for a bed and a hole in the floor for a toilet. They'd taken his jumpsuit, leaving him in his underwear, standard procedure for inmates on suicide watch, though he hadn't expressed any suicidal thoughts. The overhead speaker hissed with white noise, not loud enough to be considered torture, but persistent enough to prevent clear thinking or rest. The light remained at full brightness, eliminating the already tenuous distinction between day and night. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Kincaid drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully asleep, never fully awake. The white noise became a canvas on which his mind projected sounds, voices, music, his father calling his name. Ray. The voice sounded so real he turned toward it. Ray, what the hell are you doing in there? His father stood before him, not the aging man who had died of a stroke 12 years ago, but the imposing figure of his childhood memories. Warden Harold Kincaid, 6'4" in his pressed uniform, ramrod straight, eyes cold with disappointment. Dad? Ray's voice cracked. Is this what a Kincaid does? The apparition gestured around the bare cell. Lets himself be broken by inmates, by them? They set me up, Ray explained desperately. Mallory betrayed me. The warden, excuses. His father's voice cut like a whip. I raised you to control this place, not be controlled by it. I tried, Dad. I did everything like you taught me. Clearly not. The contempt in his father's voice was familiar, a tone Ray had heard throughout his childhood, whenever he failed to meet expectations. A real Kincaid would never end up in here. I don't know what to do, Ray admitted, hating the weakness in his voice. Fight back. Show them who's in charge. That's what your grandfather would have done. That's what I would have done. As quickly as the hallucination had appeared, it vanished, leaving Ray alone in the bare cell with the ceaseless white noise. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to squeeze out the sound, the visions, the rising panic. Dad! The word escaped as a desperate cry echoing against the concrete walls. Dad, please! There was no answer, only the relentless hiss of static. In the control room, Officer Glenn Rourke watched the monitor displaying Kincaid's cell with growing unease. The former sergeant sat rocking on the concrete slab, hands pressed to his head, occasionally shouting at empty air. How long has he been like this? Rourke asked the officer on duty. Since they put him in there yesterday. The officer, Davies, barely glanced up from his magazine. Standard protocol for threatening another inmate. Standard protocol includes white noise for 24 hours straight? Davies shrugged. Special circumstances. Warden approved it. Rourke doubted that very much. In her last briefing, Warden Danner had specifically instructed that Kincaid be treated according to standard procedures. No better, no worse than any other inmate. Who authorized the noise? Rourke pressed. Don't know. Came from up the chain. Davies finally looked up, irritation evident. What's with the 20 questions? Since when do you care about Kincaid's comfort? Rourke had no good answer. His conflicted feelings about Kincaid remained a tangled mess. Contempt for the man's cruelty warring with growing discomfort at witnessing his breakdown. "Just doing my job," he said finally, echoing words he'd heard from Kincaid himself. On the monitor, Kincaid had begun tracing patterns on the wall with his finger, lips moving in silent conversation with someone who wasn't there. 3 days. In disciplinary segregation reduced Ray Kincaid to a shadow of himself. When they finally returned him to his regular cell, he shuffled rather than walked, eyes darting nervously at shadows. His jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, weight dropping rapidly from a combination of stress and irregular meals. The familiar flicker of his cell light seemed almost comforting after the steady glare of disciplinary segregation. He collapsed onto his bunk, body craving sleep, but mind too fractured to surrender to it. As night settled over the SHU, a new sound penetrated the usual ambient noise, voices barely audible at first coming from multiple cells. Not the recitation of names that had haunted his earlier nights, but something different. Words. "Am not a number," came from one direction. "Am a human being." From another. "Deserve dignity." From yet another. The phrases repeated, overlapped, separated, then rejoined in an eerie harmony that seemed orchestrated. Kincaid pressed his ear to the wall, trying to identify individual speakers, but the voices blended too seamlessly. Not an animal. Not trash. A father. A son. Deserve justice. The words were familiar, fragments of complaints he had dismissed over the years, pleas he had ignored, humanity he had denied. Now they returned as a ghostly chorus, the collective voice of hundreds of men who had passed through these cells. Kincaid covered his ears, but the voices persisted, seeping through his fingers, penetrating his consciousness. "Stop," he whispered, then louder. "Stop." The chorus continued unabated, indifferent to his distress, just as he had been indifferent to theirs. In desperation, he began to bang his fist against the wall. "Shut up, all of you, shut up." The metal door slot slid open and Officer Washington's face appeared. "Problem, Kincaid?" "Make them stop," Kincaid pleaded, gesturing wildly at the walls. "The voices." Washington listened for a moment, his expression neutral. "I don't hear anything." "They're there. Listen," Kincaid insisted. "Only voice I hear is yours," Washington replied. "And it's after lights out, so quiet down before you catch another ticket." As the slot closed, the chorus continued, a soft, relentless affirmation of humanity that Kincaid had spent years denying. "Am not a number. Am a human being." The following morning, when Kincaid emerged for his recreation hour, he found Malik Ramsey already in the adjacent cage, seated cross-legged on the concrete, eyes closed in meditation. Kincaid approached the chain link separating them, hands trembling slightly. "They won't stop," he said without preamble. Ramsey opened his eyes. "Who won't stop?" "The voices, all night, the same phrases, over and over." Kincaid ran a hand through his unwashed hair. "I know you're behind it. You're orchestrating all of this." "And if I am?" Ramsey asked calmly. "What would you have me do?" "Make it stop, please." The word please felt foreign on Kincaid's tongue, not a word he had often directed toward inmates. Ramsey studied him for a long moment. "The voices you hear, do you recognize what they're saying?" "Some kind of, I don't know, affirmations." "Not just any affirmations." Ramsey stood, moving closer to the fence. "Words from grievance forms. Requests for basic dignity. Appeals that crossed your desk and were stamped denied." Kincaid's knees felt suddenly weak. He gripped the fence for support. "How long will this go on?" "That depends on you." "On me? What do you want from me?" Desperation edged Kincaid's voice. "An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Is that what you want to hear?" "Words are cheap, Sergeant." Ramsey's voice remained steady, especially when motivated by self-interest. Then what? What do you want? It's not about what I want. Ramsey's eyes held his. It's about what you need. And what do I need? Kincaid asked, voice barely above a whisper. To see. Ramsey gestured to the small mirror mounted in the corner of the recreation area, a security feature allowing guards to monitor blind spots. In its reflection, Kincaid caught a glimpse of himself, gaunt, disheveled, eyes haunted. Really see? The image shocked him. He barely recognized the desperate figure in the mirror, a broken man stripped of authority, of identity, of the scaffolding that had supported his sense of self. What have you done to me? He asked hoarsely. Nothing you didn't do to others, Ramsey replied, no triumph in his voice, only quiet certainty. The difference is they had no power. You did. Kincaid sank to his knees, still gripping the fence. I was doing my job. Your job was to secure, not torment, to maintain order, not inflict suffering. Ramsey knelt as well, bringing them eye to eye. You chose cruelty when restraint was an option, humiliation when dignity would have sufficed. Why? I don't know. The admission felt torn from somewhere deep inside him. Because that's how it was always done. Because that's what I was taught. By your father? Kincaid nodded mutely. And who taught him? His father. My grandfather. And what did they believe about the men in their custody? Ramsey pressed. About men who looked like me? The question hung between them, demanding an answer Kincaid had never before articulated aloud. The truth he had inherited, absorbed, and perpetuated without examination. That you were less, he finally said, the words leaving a bitter taste. Dangerous, needing to be controlled. And now? Ramsey asked softly. What do you believe now? Kincaid looked up, meeting Ramsey's gaze through the chain link that separated them. A physical barrier that suddenly seemed to represent something much deeper, the artificial divisions he had spent his life enforcing. I don't know anymore, he admitted. I don't know anything anymore. Ramsey nodded as if this uncertainty was progress rather than defeat. Now you see, he said simply. In the silence that followed, Kincaid became aware that the distant hum of the SHU had changed. The irregular flickering of lights had steadied. The white noise had faded. Even the air seemed somehow clearer, as if a storm had passed. As the guards came to return them to their cells, Ramsey added one final thought. This was never about breaking you, Sergeant. It was about breaking through. Kincaid carried those words back to his cell, turning them over in his mind like strange artifacts from another world. For the first time since his arrival in SHU, the voices that night were silent, leaving him alone with the one voice he had spent a lifetime avoiding, his own. The voices had stopped, but the silence that replaced them was almost worse. In the quiet of his cell, Ray Kincaid had nowhere to hide from the memories that surfaced like bodies rising from a lake, bloated, distorted, but unmistakable. The first came during breakfast, a flash so vivid it made him drop his spoon. He's 9 years old, standing in his father's study, a broken trophy on the floor between them. I didn't mean to, he sang, voice small with fear. His father's hand comes down hard across his face. Kincaids don't make excuses, his father says. Kincaids take responsibility, then Kincaids take control. Control, always control. The memory dissolved, leaving him disoriented, the taste of blood in his mouth so real he touched his lip, expecting to find it split. Later, lying on his bunk staring at the ceiling, another memory surfaced. His first day at Coldwater, 22, years old, following his father through the corridors. Inmates step back as they pass, eyes down, his father's legacy of fear palpable in their deference. Remember, his father is saying, they respect only one thing: force. Show weakness and they'll destroy you. Show strength and they'll fall in line. They stop at a cell where a young black inmate stands with perfect posture, eyes meeting theirs directly. not with defiance but with dignity. Something about that quiet self-possession seems to irritate his father. "This one thinks he's special," his father remarks. "Former teacher, likes to read philosophy, thinks it makes him better than the rest." Ray realizes with a jolt that he's looking at a younger Malik Ramsey, new to the system then, but already marked by his refusal to be diminished. "Watch and learn," his father says, then turns to Ramsey. "Hand over the book." Ramsey hesitates, just for a second. "It's approved reading material, Warden." "I didn't ask if it was approved, I said hand it over." His father's voice carries the absolute certainty of unquestioned authority. Ramsey carefully marks his place, then passes the book through the slot. His father glances at the title, Dostoevsky's The House of the Dead, then tears several pages free before handing it back. "Oops," he says with a cold smile. "Seems your book has a defect." Later, his father explains, "Never let them keep anything whole, especially their dignity." Kincaid sat up abruptly, stomach churning at the memory. The parallel to his own behavior, tearing Ramsey's book years later, was too precise to ignore. He had replicated his father's cruelty with mechanical precision, never questioning its purpose or effect. A knock at his cell door interrupted his thoughts. Officer Washington stood there with a package. "Delivery from Chaplain Brooks," Washington announced, passing a manila envelope through the slot. Inside, Kincaid found a journal, leather-bound with the Coldwater Correctional logo embossed on the cover, and 2 pencils. A note in Brooks's handwriting was paper-clipped to the first page. "The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. Some things can only be understood when written in our own hand. Start with the truth as you know it." Chaplain Brooks. Kincaid set the journal aside, strangely unsettled by its blank pages and the expectation they represented. When Washington returned with lunch, he brought another, slimmer notebook. "From Inmate Ramsey," he explained. "Says you've earned the right to read it." This second journal was worn, its pages dog-eared and covered in different handwritings. A note on the first page, in Ramsey's neat script, explained, "These are testimonials from men who passed through SHU under your supervision. Their words, unedited. Their truth, unfiltered. Read them all." Kincaid almost closed the book immediately, some part of him still resistant to facing direct evidence of his impact. But the cell offered no escape, no distraction from this moment of reckoning. He began to read. The first entry, signed Marcus Johnson, described a week in darkness after Kincaid had ordered the light in his cell disabled as punishment for a minor infraction. The second, from Darrell Wright, recounted how Kincaid had denied his request to call his mother as she lay dying, only to inform him of her passing 3 days after the funeral. Entry after entry documented moments Kincaid barely remembered, casual cruelties he had inflicted without a second thought, lives he had impacted without consideration. "Kincaid once waited until I was on the toilet to do cell inspection. Refused. To let me pull up my pants. Made me stand like that while he took his time, laughing with the other guards. I ain't never felt so small." Andre Simmons. Asked for my asthma inhaler during an attack. Kincaid said I was faking for attention. By the time medical arrived, I'd passed out. Doctor said another few minutes and I might have died. Kincaid wrote me up for creating a disturbance. Terrell Booker. My son sent me a drawing for my birthday. Kincaid confiscated it as contraband, said artwork wasn't allowed. Later saw it in the trash, torn up. My boy was 6 years old. DeAndre Phillips. As Kincaid read, he experienced a strange doubling of consciousness, part of him retreating into defensive justification. I was following protocol. Maintaining order. They're exaggerating. Another part finally acknowledging the human cost of his actions. One entry in particular stopped him cold. Kincaid isn't just cruel. He's a true believer. Once heard him tell a new guard, "They're animals pretending to be men." That's the real poison at Coldwater, not just actions but beliefs. Men like Kincaid don't see us as human. How do you rehabilitate someone you don't even see as a person? Malik Ramsey. The words burned like acid, dissolving the last of his self-deception. Kincaid closed the journal, his hands shaking. That night, the dreams came in fragments, shards of memory mixed with fear and dawning recognition. He's in his father's truck, 13 years old. They're driving past a civil rights demonstration in Jackson. Animals, his father mutters, stirring up trouble, demanding what they haven't earned. He's standing in the SHU corridor his first day as supervisor, his father's hand on his shoulder, a torch passing. This is our legacy, son. Keeping order. Protecting society. He's watching a prisoner being dragged to disciplinary segregation, the man's pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. Something in him knows this is wrong, but that voice is quickly silenced by his father's teachings. Weakness is failure. Doubt is weakness. Control is everything. Kincaid woke gasping, sweat-soaked despite the cell's chill. In the dim light, he could almost see his father standing in the corner, watching with disapproval. "They've broken you," the apparition said. "No." Kincaid sat up. "They've woken me up." To what? Some bleeding heart fantasy that these men deserve better? That they're your equals? His father's ghost sneered. "Your grandfather understood." "I understood. Why can't you?" "Because it's wrong," Kincaid whispered. "What we did. What I did. It's necessary," the hallucination insisted. "Someone has to keep order. Order doesn't require cruelty." His father's ghost laughed coldly. "When did you get so soft?" "When I ended up on the other side," Kincaid answered. "When I had to face what I've done." The apparition began to fade. "You're no son of mine." "Maybe that's for the best," Kincaid replied to the empty cell. Morning brought a different visitor. Chaplain Brooks entered the cell carrying a Bible and a cup of coffee. Real coffee, not the watered-down version served to inmates. "Thought you might appreciate this," Brooks said, offering the steaming cup. "Small comforts matter in here." Kincaid accepted it gratefully, the warm ceramic strange against his fingers after weeks of plastic utensils. "Thank you." Brooks settled on the metal desk. "Did you read the journal Ramsey sent?" "Every word." Kincaid took a sip of coffee, its bitterness somehow grounding. Hard to face. Truth usually is. Brooks studied him. "Did you use the journal I sent?" Kincaid glanced at the leather-bound book, still untouched on his bunk. "Not yet. Easier to read others' pain than to articulate your own?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. "When I was running with gangs," Brooks said, changing direction, "I hurt people, sold them poison, destroyed families, carried that guilt like stones in my pockets, weighing me down, drowning me. What changed? I got shot." Brooks touched his chest where the bullet had entered years ago. "Laying there bleeding out, I made a deal with God. Let me live and I'll speak truth for the rest of my days." "And he listened?" "I'm here, aren't I?" Brooks smiled slightly. "But speaking, truth meant first facing it, all of it, the ugliness in me, the damage I'd done, the beliefs that let me justify it." Kincaid looked down at his coffee. "I'm not sure I have that kind of courage." "You do," Brooks said simply. "You just need to find it." They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet between them different from the oppressive silence of isolation, a shared stillness almost companionable. "Ramsey doesn't hate you," Brooks said eventually. "That surprises you, doesn't it?" It did. Hatred would have made sense, would have been easier in some ways to understand. "What he feels is more dangerous than hate," Brooks continued. "It's determination, to make you see, to make you understand. Hate would have led to violence. His way leads to something harder. Genuine change." "What if I can't change?" Kincaid asked. "What if this legacy is too deep in me?" Brooks stood, preparing to leave. "No one is beyond redemption, Ray. But redemption isn't something given, it's something claimed. Through action. Through truth. At the door, he paused. The question isn't whether you can change. It's what you'll do with the truth now that you've seen it. After Brooks left, Kincaid picked up the blank journal and one of the pencils. For a long time, he simply held them, the weight of potential confession both terrifying and oddly liberating. Finally, he opened to the first page and began to write. My name is Ray Kincaid. I was taught to believe certain men were less than human. I built my life and career on that lie. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. He wrote about his father, about his grandfather's role in establishing Coldwater, about the legacy of dehumanization he had inherited and perpetuated without question. I tore up books because educated black inmates threatened a worldview that required them to be inferior. I denied basic dignity because acknowledging their humanity would have forced me to question everything I believed, everything I was raised to be. He wrote until his hand cramped, filling page after page with admissions he had never before articulated, even to himself. When he finally set the pencil down, hours had passed and something had shifted inside him. Painful but necessary, like a bone being reset after a break. As if responding to this internal shift, his cell door opened. Officer Rourke stood there, expression carefully neutral. Warden Danner wants to see you, he announced. Says it's important. Kincaid stood, the journal clutched in his hand. Do I need this? Rourke glanced at it, then nodded. I think you might. As they walked through the SU corridor, Kincaid was acutely aware of the eyes tracking him. Not just inmates, but officers as well. Some curious, some hostile, a few something harder to define. Near the exit, they passed Mook Wallace, who was mopping the floor. The muscular inmate paused in his work, mop handle gripped like a weapon. Teach says you're starting to understand, Mook said, voice low enough that only Kincaid could hear. For your sake, I hope that's true. The implied threat was clear, but underneath it, Kincaid sensed something else, a conditional offer of peace dependent on his next actions. I'm trying, he replied simply. Mook nodded once, then resumed his work, the conversation over but its implications lingering as Kincaid followed Rourke toward whatever reckoning awaited in the warden's office. Warden Danner's office felt impossibly large after weeks in a cell. The plush carpet, the natural light streaming through real windows, the absence of constant institutional noise, it all seemed extravagant, almost obscene in its comfort. Kincaid sat stiffly in the chair across from Danner's desk, journal clutched in his hands. Officer Rourke standing quietly by the door. The warden studied him with clinical detachment, noting the weight loss, the haunted eyes, the constant slight, tremor in his hands. You've had quite an experience, Sergeant Kincaid, she finally said. I'm not a sergeant anymore, he replied, voice rough from disuse. No, you're not. Danner leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. You've been officially terminated from Coldwater Correctional. The investigation into your conduct has concluded, and the findings have been submitted to the state attorney's office. Kincaid nodded, having expected as much. The charges being considered include multiple civil rights violations, falsification of official records, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. She paused. These are serious federal charges, Mr. Kincaid. I understand. Do you? She raised an eyebrow. You're looking at significant prison time, not in administrative segregation, not with special protection, regular time, in a facility where your reputation will precede you. The implication was clear. A former corrections officer would be a marked man in general population, especially one known for racial bias and abuse of power. Why am I here? Kincaid asked. If decisions have already been made. Because I'm offering you an alternative. Danner opened a folder on her desk. The state attorney is prepared to consider a plea arrangement in exchange for your full cooperation and testimony against other officers involved in systematic abuse at Coldwater. They'll recommend a reduced sentence with possible placement in a minimum security facility. Kincaid's eyes narrowed. You want me to inform on my colleagues? I want you to tell the truth, Danner corrected, about the culture of abuse that existed here long before my arrival, about who participated, who knew, who looked the other way, about how deep the rot goes. And if I refuse, then you face the full consequences of your actions without mitigation. Her voice hardened. Make no mistake, Mr. Kincaid. The evidence against you is overwhelming. This isn't a negotiation for your innocence. It's an opportunity to demonstrate some measure of accountability. Kincaid glanced at Rourke, who stood with eyes downcast, then back to Danner. You already have Mallory's testimony, and others, I assume. Why do you need mine? Because you were the linchpin. Danner tapped the folder. Mallory, Jenkins, others, they followed your lead. But this system predates all of you. It goes back to the founding of this institution. To my grandfather, Kincaid said quietly. Something flickered in Danner's eyes. Surprise at his acknowledgement. Yes. To your grandfather, to your father, to a legacy of treating certain inmates as less than human. You're not just a participant, Mr. Kincaid. You're a primary source on how deeply embedded this ideology is at Coldwater. Kincaid looked down at the journal in his hands where he had already begun to document exactly what Danner was asking for. Still, old loyalties died hard. I need to think about it, he said. You have 24 hours. Danner pushed a legal pad across the desk. Write your statement. Full, complete, holding nothing back. Or prepare for transfer to county lockup pending trial. As Rourke escorted him out, Kincaid felt oddly untethered, caught between the man he had been and the man he was becoming, between self-preservation and truth. Back in his cell, Kincaid sat on his bunk, the legal pad untouched beside him. His mind raced through options, calculating angles, weighing loyalties that had shaped his entire adult life. The cell door opened and Officer Rourke entered, an unusual breach of protocol. Sir, Rourke began, then stopped, correcting himself. Mr. Kincaid, I wanted to say something. Kincaid looked up, surprised. I'm sorry, Rourke said simply. Not for reporting what happened with Ramsey, that was right, but for being complicit at first. For hesitating to speak up when I knew something was wrong. The young officer's directness caught Kincaid off guard. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been thinking about moral courage. How hard it is to do the right thing when there's a cost. Rourke met his gaze steadily. You have that choice now. It's not that simple, Kincaid argued. You're asking me to turn on men I've worked with for years. Men like my father. With respect, sir. Men who participated in abuse. Men who looked the other way while inmates were dehumanized. Rourke's voice was quiet but firm. Men who failed the oath they took. The words landed heavily. Kincaid had recited that oath on his first day, to uphold the law, to protect those in his custody, to maintain the dignity of the institution. My wife had our baby last week, Rourke continued. A boy. I've been thinking about what I'll tell him someday about the kind of man I was during this time, what I stood for. The mention of a child, of legacy, struck Kincaid like a physical blow. What was his legacy? What thread ran from his grandfather through his father to him? And could that thread be broken? Congratulations, he said hoarsely. On your son. Rourke nodded. Thank you. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I think you know what the right thing is. It's just a question of whether you have the courage to do it. After Rourke left, Kincaid sat motionless for a long time. Then slowly, he picked up the legal pad and began to write. Hours later, when the chaplain visited, he found Kincaid, surrounded by crumpled pages, frustration evident in the tight lines of his face. Having trouble finding the words? Brooks asked, taking a seat on the desk. Not exactly. Kincaid gestured to the discarded attempts. I keep writing what happened. The facts, but it feels incomplete. Because recounting actions without examining motives is always incomplete, Brooks suggested. It's the difference between confession and true repentance. Kincaid considered this. I've written that I allowed officers to plant contraband, that I falsified reports, that I targeted certain inmates for harsher treatment. But not why. No. Kincaid ran a hand through his unkempt hair. Not why. Brooks reached for one of the crumpled pages, smoothing it out. May I? Kincaid nodded. After reading for a moment, Brooks set the page down. It's factual, accurate, I'm sure, but sterile, safe. Safe? You've detailed what you did, but kept yourself at a distance from it, as if these were just procedural irregularities, not expressions of something deeper. Brooks leaned forward. What are you afraid of admitting, Ray? The question hung between them, demanding an answer Kincaid had spent his life avoiding. That it wasn't just about maintaining order, he finally said, voice barely audible. That it was about power, control, beliefs I was raised with. About who deserves dignity, about whose humanity counts. Kincaid couldn't meet the chaplain's eyes. About race. Brooks nodded, not surprised but respectful of the admission's difficulty. That's the confession that matters. Not just the what, but the why. The poison at the root. Kincaid took a fresh sheet of paper, hand hovering over it. If I write this, if I say these things, I'm not just implicating myself. I'm implicating my father, my grandfather, their legacy. Yes, Brooks agreed simply. You are. Is that fair? They're not here to defend themselves. Their actions speak for them, just as yours speak for you. Brooks stood, moving toward the door. The question is whether you'll let their choices keep dictating yours. After the chaplain left, Kincaid began again. This time he started not with his actions at Coldwater, but with his childhood, with the lessons taught by his father, with the legacy he had inherited without question, with the beliefs that had shaped his view of the men in his custody. Was raised to believe that order required force, that certain men, black men especially, were inherently dangerous, less deserving of dignity, requiring a firm hand. This wasn't stated openly as racism. It was couched in terms like maintaining, discipline, and necessary control. But the application revealed the truth beneath the words. My grandfather helped establish Coldwater Correctional in 1948, when Mississippi needed additional facilities to house black prisoners after Parchman became overcrowded. The unofficial motto, never written, but often repeated in private, was, keep them contained, keep them controlled, keep them in their place. My father continued this tradition during his 15 years as warden, incorporating new methods of control while maintaining the underlying philosophy. I watched and learned, absorbing the unspoken belief that black inmates were fundamentally different, more violent, less redeemable, requiring harsher measures to maintain compliance. When I joined the corrections staff, I perpetuated these practices without questioning their foundation. I targeted inmates like Malik Ramsey, not just because they broke rules, but because their dignity, their education, their humanity challenged a worldview I had never examined. As he wrote, something broke free inside him, a weight of generations, a burden he had carried without acknowledging. The words flowed easier now, confession becoming unburdening, truth becoming its own form of freedom. The next morning, when Warden Danner returned, Kincaid handed her not the single-page statement she had requested, but a 12-page document that began with his grandfather and ended with his final days as sergeant. It's all there, he said simply. Names, dates, incidents, and the why behind it all. Danner skimmed the first page, her expression carefully neutral. This is more comprehensive than I expected. It's the truth, all of it. Kincaid met her gaze directly. Do what you need to with it. After she left with his statement, Kincaid felt strangely hollowed out, emptied of the poison he had carried for so long, uncertain what would fill the space it left behind. That afternoon, a final delivery arrived. The journal he had sent to Ramsey for review returned with a note on the last page. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Martin Luther King, Jr. You've taken the first step on a long road. The hardest part isn't admitting the truth, it's living with it, and choosing differently because of it. We all choose who we serve every day in large ways and small. Malik Ramsey. Beneath these words, Ramsey had added one final thought, underlined for emphasis. Truth without action is just noise. What happens next is what matters. Kincaid read the note several times, feeling its weight. For the first time in weeks, he slept deeply, without dreams or visitations from his father's ghost. Some part of him recognized that a door had closed behind him, and another had opened ahead. The next day brought news. Based on his testimony, Internal Affairs had expanded their investigation to include 6 additional officers and 2 former wardens. Mallory faced additional charges after inconsistencies in his earlier statements were revealed by Kincaid's more detailed account. Most significantly, Kincaid would be transferred to general population under protective observation, pending formal charges. A calculated risk, but one that acknowledged his cooperation and perhaps the beginning of his accountability. As officers came to escort him from SHU, Kincaid paused at Ramsey's cell. The 2 men regarded each other through the narrow window, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "Thank you," Kincaid said simply. "For what?" Ramsey asked. "For not taking the easy path. Violence would have been simpler." "Violence is never simple," Ramsey replied. "It just creates new cycles of pain. What you did instead," Kincaid searched for words, "making me see, making me feel what others felt. It was more effective than any beating could have been." "That was the point," Ramsey acknowledged. "Not revenge. Understanding." As Kincaid turned to leave, Ramsey added, "The system doesn't change just because one man sees the truth. Remember that." Those words followed Kincaid as he walked out of SSU for the last time, not as an officer, but as an inmate. Not as a continuation of his father's legacy, but as its repudiation. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, the consequences of his actions. But for the first time in his life, Ray Kincaid walked a path of his own choosing, one guided by truth rather than inherited hatred, by accountability rather than power. The weight of that choice was heavy, but he carried it willingly, one step at a time. 6 weeks later, Ray Kincaid stood over an industrial washing machine in Coldwater's laundry facility, mechanically feeding sheets into its maw. The rhythmic tumble of the machines had become a strange comfort, predictable, constant, demanding nothing but the repetition of simple tasks. His world had contracted to a series of careful routines. Wake at 5:30, breakfast at 6:15, sitting alone at the edge of the cafeteria. Work detail from 8 hours to 4 hours, with a 30-minute lunch break. Recreation from 4:30 to 5:30, keeping to the periphery of the yard. Dinner at 6 hours, cell time until lights out at 10 hours. Survival through invisibility, endurance through routine. The other inmates largely left him alone, not out of respect but out of a complex calculus of prison politics. As a former guard facing charges for abusing inmates, he was a natural target. But as someone who had broken the code of silence, testifying against his colleagues and the system itself, he occupied an ambiguous position, despised by staff, cautiously assessed by inmates. It helped that his revelations had triggered real changes. CO Trent Mallory had been suspended pending criminal charges, along with 5 other officers implicated in Kincaid's testimony. Warden Danner had implemented mandatory body cameras for all SHU officers, with footage reviewed daily by civilian oversight. The average stay in segregation had been reduced from months to weeks. Most significantly, a class action lawsuit had been filed on behalf of former SHU inmates, with Malik Ramsey as the lead plaintiff. The Southern Poverty Law Center had taken the case, and national media had picked up the story, another spotlight on the systemic abuses hidden within America's prison system. None of this made Kincaid popular. But it created a buffer around him, a recognition that bigger forces were at play, that his fate was tied to institutional changes some inmates cautiously welcomed. As he loaded another batch of sheets, Officer Glenn Rourke approached, maintaining a professional distance. "Mail for you, Kincaid." He held out a thin envelope. "Thanks." Kincaid took it, noting the official seal of the state attorney's office. His plea arrangement, most likely. Rourke hesitated, then added quietly, "Heard Ramsey got a trial date. Next month. They're fast-tracking his case review." Kincaid nodded, a mix of emotions rising at the news. "Good. That's good." "Your testimony helped make that happen," Rourke noted, careful to keep his voice neutral, neither praising nor condemning. It was the right thing to do. Kincaid's response was automatic but sincere. After Rourke moved on, Kincaid tucked the envelope into his pocket, saving it for later. Whatever it contained, confirmation of his plea deal, details of his eventual sentencing, could wait. The present moment, with its mundane tasks and established boundaries, offered its own form of peace. The yard at Coldwater was divided by invisible but rigid territories, areas claimed by different groups, boundaries understood and respected to maintain the tenuous equilibrium of prison life. As a former guard, now inmate, Kincaid occupied a narrow strip along the fence unclaimed by any faction, where he walked his daily laps in solitude. Today, as he rounded the corner of his fourth lap, he noticed a small gathering near the basketball court. A dozen or so inmates seated in a rough circle around Chaplain Brooks. The informal religious service was a recent addition to yard activities, part of Warden Danner's expanded programming initiatives. Curious, Kincaid paused within earshot, maintaining a respectful distance. "Not everything that is faced can be changed," Brooks was saying, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "But nothing can be changed until it is faced." Murmurs of agreement rose from the seated men. James Baldwin wrote those words about America's refusal to face its history of racism, Brooks continued. But they apply to our personal lives just as powerfully. We cannot transform what we refuse to acknowledge. Kincaid found himself nodding, unconsciously, the words resonating with his recent journey. "Some of you know that changes are coming to Coldwater," Brooks addressed the group. "New policies in SHU, new oversight, new leadership in certain departments." A few men exchanged knowing glances. "These are positive steps," Brooks acknowledged. "But policies don't change hearts. Rules don't transform beliefs. For real change, to take root, we must each face our own contributions to the system, whether we're inmates, officers, or administrators." As Brooks continued speaking, Kincaid's attention was drawn to movement at the yard's entrance. Malik Ramsey emerged into the sunlight, accompanied by Deshaun "Mook" Wallace. The two men walked with the easy confidence of those respected within the prison hierarchy, nodding acknowledgments to others as they crossed the yard. Ramsey looked different, still composed, still dignified, but with a new energy in his step. The burden of wrongful conviction was lifting, his case moving toward potential vindication after years of patient endurance. As if sensing observation, Ramsey glanced in Kincaid's direction. Their eyes met across the yard, former tormentor and tormented, oppressor and oppressed, now both inmates in the same system, though on very different trajectories. Neither man moved to approach the other. Neither raised a hand in greeting. But in that moment of eye contact, something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition, acknowledgement of a journey shared, however asymmetrically. Ramsey gave a nearly imperceptible nod before continuing on his way, Mook a protective presence at his side. The exchange lasted seconds, witnessed by no one else, yet Kincaid felt its weight, the closest thing to closure their complicated history would likely permit. That evening, as inmates filtered into the cafeteria for dinner, an unusual tension permeated the air. Conversations were muted. Glances darted toward the officers, stationed along the walls. Something had shifted in the delicate ecosystem of Coldwater. Kincaid took his usual isolated seat, keeping his head down, attuned to the currents of information that flowed through the prison. Nearby, he overheard fragments of conversation. Fired Jennings and Wilson this morning. Entire night. Shift under investigation. Mallory's talking to the feds, naming names. The ripples of his testimony continued to spread, disrupting decades of entrenched practices, threatening careers built on the foundation of abuse he had helped expose. As he ate, Kincaid became aware of someone standing beside his table. Looking up, he was surprised to see a young black inmate, barely 20, new to Coldwater, someone he didn't recognize from his time as an officer. "You Kincaid?" the young man asked. Kincaid tensed, preparing for confrontation. "Yes. Teach asked me to give you this." The inmate slid a folded piece of paper across the table, then left without waiting for a response. Warily, Kincaid opened the note. Inside, in Ramsey's precise handwriting, was a brief message. "Southern Poverty Law Center wants my statement about SHU conditions for the lawsuit. I'm including the changes implemented since your testimony. Truth deserves acknowledgement, even from unexpected sources. Ramsey, no threats, no demands, just recognition of impact, of truth serving justice, however incompletely." Kincaid carefully refolded the note and tucked it into his shirt pocket, next to the still unopened letter from the state attorney. 2 documents representing the past and future of his altered life, physical reminders of choices made and consequences accepted. Later that night, in the quiet of his cell, Kincaid finally opened the official envelope. Inside was confirmation of his plea agreement. In exchange for his comprehensive testimony, he would serve 5 years in a minimum security facility, with eligibility for parole after 3. The sentence was lighter than he deserved, a fact he acknowledged without reservation. But the document's final paragraph suggested his testimony's value had transcended his individual case. The information provided by Mr. Kincaid has proven instrumental in uncovering systematic civil rights violations at Coldwater Correctional Facility, dating back decades. His cooperation has directly contributed to ongoing structural reforms within the Mississippi Department of Corrections. Institutional language for a simple truth, speaking honestly about what he had done, what he had witnessed, what he had perpetuated, had helped begin the process of change. Not redemption. He harbored no illusions about that. But perhaps something adjacent to it. A reckoning. A correction. Kincaid set the letter aside and took out the small notebook he had continued keeping since his time in SHU. In it, he had documented his journey, from unquestioning enforcement of a brutal system to reluctant recognition of its foundations in racism and dehumanization, from inherited hatred to hard-won insight. On a fresh page, he began to write, "The arc of justice moves slowly, but it does move. Not in perfect alignment with our wishes or expectations, not without resistance and setbacks. But when truth is spoken, really spoken with its full weight and implications, something shifts. Not everything, not completely, but something. I entered Coldwater as my father's son, carrier of a legacy I never questioned. I will leave it as my own man, bearing responsibility for my actions and their consequences. The system that shaped me continues, altered but intact. The question remains whether institutions built on control and dehumanization can ever truly transform, or whether they simply adapt, finding new masks for old prejudices. I don't have the answer, but I have found my question, and perhaps that's a start." The following morning, as Kincaid crossed the yard for his work detail, he passed Chaplain Brooks engaged in conversation with a small group of inmates. The chaplain nodded in acknowledgement, then detached himself to walk alongside Kincaid for a few paces. "I hear you're being transferred next week," Brooks said. "Minimum security in Jackson." "Word travels fast," Kincaid replied. "Good news. Usually does." Brooks studied him. "You look different from the man who entered SU 2 months ago." "I feel different." Kincaid paused. "Though I'm not sure I've earned it." "Transformation isn't earned, it's experienced," Brooks corrected gently. "What matters is what you do with it." They walked in silence for a moment, the morning sun casting long shadows across the yard. In the distance, Kincaid could see work, crews assembling, officers giving instructions, the daily routine of the prison unfolding with mechanical precision. The system continued, as it had for generations. Changed in some aspects, resistant in others, its fundamental nature still intact. One man's journey from enforcer to witness, from certainty to question, had created ripples, but the ocean remained. "What happens now?" Kincaid asked, the question encompassing more than his personal fate. "Now?" Brooks smiled slightly. "Now the real work begins, for all of us." As they reached the entrance to the industrial building housing the laundry, Brooks extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kincaid shook it, a simple human gesture bridging complex divides. "SU law," Brooks said cryptically as they parted. "What?" "Something the inmates say. SU law." Brooks explained. "The idea that true justice finds its way, even in the darkest corners of places like this. That what goes around comes around, for better or worse." "Do you believe that?" Kincaid asked. "I believe in accountability," Brooks replied carefully, "and in the possibility of change, real change, not just new policies or reduced sentences, but transformation of hearts and systems, even systems like Coldwater." Brooks glanced around at the prison complex, its imposing walls, its guard towers, its razor wire glinting in the morning sun. A place built to contain, to control, to separate. "Especially systems like Coldwater," he answered, "because they're made of people. And people, Mr. Kincaid, can always surprise you." As Brooks walked away, Kincaid turned toward the laundry facility, where machines waited to be loaded, sheets to be washed, routines to be followed. Small tasks in a small corner of a vast system. Yet in their execution lay a choice: to proceed, with awareness or autopilot, with humanity or detachment, with questions or certainty. Today, Ray Kincaid chose awareness. Tomorrow would bring its own choices, its own challenges. The journey toward something better, something more just, more human, continued, incomplete but underway. One step at a time, one truth at a time. One day at a time. SHU law. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.